The backup QB battle got very interesting on Saturday, but are we maybe overreacting? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. You all make the world go round. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Today on the show, jam-packed show, I'm going to talk about the backup QBs. We got three of them that played games that maybe change the order a little bit, right? Things that maybe make you start asking some questions you weren't asking before that game. I also want to get into some of the down roster stuff, play a little elimination game, because I do think some people played in the preseason in such a way that makes you kind of take them out of the equation, and now they've got two games to earn their way back in. But let's start with the backup quarterbacks. I'm not going to spend all day on this. I do want to talk a lot about the rest of the roster, but we have to, I think, rethink the order of the depth chart here, and we'll see what happens in the joint practices and, of course, in the preseason, who plays how much. But here is where I came out of the live watch, was thinking, wow, Sam Howell did excellent, Max Brosmer did excellent, Brett Rippon really sucked. On rewatch, I think I'm like backing off and just sort of, I think it was just too extreme. I think those are still the opinions, like on the good and bad of it, but just a little bit less intensely. But to start with Sam Howell, I think the whole thing of like all four of these quarterbacks in this game looked really well coached. The ball was out on time. There wasn't a lot of extra hitching. There wasn't a lot of confusion. You didn't ever really see guys not know what to do. Everything was decisive. And you can tell that like timing has been quite the emphasis for the Minnesota Vikings quarterback room. And I think Sam Howell is the best example of it. I don't have really any hot takes here. What you saw on TV is very much what happened. Everything was on time. There were even some really tight windows. And that is like the thing of Sam Howell. You definitely saw him do some dangerous things. And I don't necessarily, I'm not going to give him as much credit as to say, this is him knowing exactly where his limits are and having this real great precision and knowing exactly how fast he can get through a window. I think it's more that he lives dangerously. He loves to take a risk. He says that guy might get there. He might not get there. I'm ripping it. Let's see if we can do this. And that's fine until it turns into an interception. And it didn't on Saturday, so he gets to be credited with a good game. But that danger very much still exists. That said, he has solidified QB2, in my opinion. I think he has to have a bad game against the Patriots or the Titans and he might not even play against the Titans. So I think the Patriots joint practices and then subsequent preseason game needs to go bad for Sam Howell before we are even remotely questioning QB2 anymore. We were going into that game. We no longer are. That's the change. And part of that is also that Brett Rippon struggled. However, I think he struggled a lot less than I thought he struggled when I first watched. There were a few throws that maybe bug you, and some of them still bug me and some of them don't anymore. There's one to Jeshaun Jones that was just like, I think stick or just like a quick out. And Jones so the way that like receivers need to run those routes when they're outbreakers is it's not just a perfect right angle, go to the sideline. It's a right angle. And then you want to like carve it back down. And by the way, if you want a visual of all of this, if you're an audio listener, which the vast majority of Locked On Vikings listeners are audio listeners. So if you're most of people, go to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, and I broke down all of this there. It's less than $4 a month. Go check it out. But to be as descriptive as possible, you want it to sort of curl back toward the quarterback. So instead of like a right angle, it should look kind of like a lowercase r, if that makes sense. And Jeshaun doesn't do that, but Rippon throws expecting him to. And so it looks like a miss, but I think it's that Jeshaun Jones ran the route wrong. And Jeshaun Jones hung Rippon out to dry on what was probably the best throw of the day, which was a beautiful rainbow go ball from Rippon right into the bucket, right into his hands. It was like a perfect pass, and he ends up dropping it, which really, really, really stinks. Who will want to play the elimination game? Jeshaun kind of had that kind of day with those two mistakes are like pretty impactful. But we'll get to more of that discussion later. As for Rippon, I think the lack of athleticism is the least answerable question here, because you can't just suddenly become faster when you're Brett Rippon. But you saw in that very first rep, he scrambles out of the pocket and he just cannot get the edge on a linebacker. And I think just about every other QB in the room can do that. That's like a huge disadvantage that Rippon has on all of the other guys when he's trying to get his place at the table, is that he's the slowest one. And it's really tough when you're the slowest one, because that means that you have to be really on your P's and Q's, and really throw darts. Everything timing wise has to be perfect. Your solution to every problem is finding a throw. And if you can't use your legs to get out of that stuff, really tough stuff, right? But there were a couple of nice throws, but there were a couple of just straight up misses. And Rippon still very much did have the worst day. So don't, think I'm going too crazy with a hot take here. He still very much did have the worst day. There was a miss on what should have been, again, maybe a misrun route. It was a corner route. And knowing the play as it usually is, it was sail. That means that there's a clear out route and then a corner, and you're basically trying to put that deep safety in a conflict, and you have something underneath in case they have two guys back there, which is a flat in this case. So, but when I see a corner, I think it has to break off at a little bit steeper of an angle than it did, and I apologize, I forget who actually ran that route. Was it Thayer Thomas maybe? And it turns out to be this really inaccurate pass. That said, it was Thayer Thomas, because what Thayer Thomas did, instead of breaking it at the depth he was supposed to, he stemmed inside, trying to get around a cornerback. Now, Thayer Thomas is a smaller receiver, and so that's what he has to do. You have to kind of get out of your stem and then restack, right? Get off the path, get around the guy, and then get back on the path. But he didn't get back on the path. And so when he got to where the route is supposed to break, he's already too far inside. He's basically behind, and he has to catch up, but he's not fast enough to catch up. So the ball falls to, I think the throw went to where it's supposed to go on the whiteboard, but the receiver wasn't there to meet it. And you might say, okay, well then that's Thayer Thomas's fault. However, as a quarterback, this happens, and you kind of should be able to make that adjustment on the fly, put that thing to where the receiver is, not where the whiteboard says to throw it. So I'm not fully absolving Brett Rippon on those things. All of this is to say, I think Brett Rippon having a disaster game, let's cut him today, Brosmer's the guy, probably a little bit overblown. I probably wouldn't go there, but there's still definitely a critiquable day. And on a similar note, Brosmer's day, I think I overrated it. It still was better than Rippon's, but it wasn't as good as Howell's. And considering the strength of competition, that's without actually factoring any of that stuff in. I'm just saying straight up, how did they play, the chips where they were? How did they play the positions that they were in? And look, there were a couple of really nice strikes. There was that one to Dante Fleming on, I think it was third down. There was, the two touchdown passes, one that Dante Fleming ultimately dropped and was overturned, and then the one to Miles Price. I think both of those were really nice plays for Brosmer. Brosmer, not Brosmer, Brosmer. Trying to get in the habit. Sorry, Gophers fans. But I think that there were a couple of misses. One to Silas Bolden. Silas Bolden was running a basic, and it was a pretty bad route. You want to talk about elimination game again, Bolden's going to be one of those guys. But essentially, when you get outside leverage, I think it was cover 3. I think it was single high, if I recall. And so when you're in that situation and you're running an in-breaker, deep safety has cleared way out, so he's not your problem. You have one guy who's to the outside of you, and you're breaking to the inside. You're breaking the other way. When you do that, what good receivers like Jefferson and Addison will do, and Hawkinson is, by the way, goated at this. He's really good. Is you lean a shoulder into the guy and just sort of widen him a little bit so that you can give yourself some space to break away, and then you create a little bit of separation. Bolden doesn't do that. There's no suddenness. He does a speed turn of it, which I do not believe you're supposed to do on that basic. And therefore there is no separation at all. That said, the ball is behind Bolden and pretty interceptable. Corner ends up not going for the pick. He just goes for the pass breakup. It tips up dangerously. This is the one that Dante Fleming almost brought down, luckily. But I think it was a pretty bad throw. And Brosmer's feet were just lined up too far to the outside, and he missed to the outside. I really do think that's all it was, is that he didn't get his alignment proper for the timing of that pass, and Bolden was just faster than he expected. And you just have to get that kind of timing down. But, you've been working with Bolden on that third team and, third and fourth kind of units for a while. So I think that is a valid critique. And that same thing happened again on a crossing route to Dante Fleming that was not good. He missed too far to the inside, and his feet were again too far to the inside. So it kind of went over his head, and it was a high miss, which then becomes really interceptable. So I think Brosmer threw two passes that he got lucky not to be intercepted, and we would be looking at his day a lot differently. Those were the two chief mistakes. So the two mistakes on the day that you had, and you had a bunch of really good plays. It's a day for a rookie that I can feel pretty good about. But certainly not the wait, is he going to be QB2 thing? I think Sam Howell put that to rest. Against harder competition than those other two, he had a better day than those other two. So I think Sam Howell very comfortably is in that QB2 conversation, and Brosmer has closed the gap against Rippon. There's a lot more stuff on the depth of the roster. There are certain players that I think we can just sort of pick up, set aside, and say, you got to prove something or you're getting cut with no drama at all. And I want to kind of play that elimination game and say, cut or keep right now, or do these guys still have a genuine, battle going on, or is it over for them? That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's futures bet season. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day. At FanDuel, and that means that it is time to go find all kinds of fun futures. Look, you can do the win totals. Vikings at 8.5 or 9.5 wins. There's kind of odds that are interesting on either of those or any other teams for win totals. You can also get passing and receiving props, rushing props, right? How many yards will Aaron Jones have? It's set at 725.5. So if you think over or under of that, you can even go stage of elimination. You can say, well, I think the Packers will make it to the wild card round, but lose like they did last year. You can actually take that. Lose in wild card round, it's plus 330 if they lose in specifically the wild card round. And they even have some other future specials, like it's plus 340 for 3 or more NFC North teams to make the playoffs. Isn't that cute? Whatever it is, visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. For 24 hours on August 26th, FanDuel gives you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling MVP or any of those other things that I just talked about, this is your moment. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, some other roster notes here now that we've sort of sorted out the backup quarterback situation. But you have some situations on the depth that I think bear mentioning. Obviously, the third team center is a bit of a scramble. It's not going to matter to the team, but they are giving Joe Huber that run at center, and then they signed a guard. Some other roster stuff that happened, by the way, Rondale Moore officially season ending, as we all feared. Big bummer. He goes on season ending IR. Zeke Correll is waived injured, which is different. It means he will revert to free agency. He also goes through waivers with that fractured ankle. So if anybody wants to set aside a roster spot for him to heal, they are allowed to do so. If he doesn't, he also reverts to season ending IR. However, if he heals before the end of the season, he would be waived with an injury settlement, and it'll be some little note that you don't care about in the middle of the season. But what it means is that he does become a true free agent. You can go sign somewhere else, and there are tiny little cap implications of that to pay attention to. Also, Brian Asamoah has been released. He is waived as part of this. So there's a little more. So there's still an extra roster spot for the Vikings. Maybe they're going to bring in Brandon Powell or somebody else to help bolster that punt return competition. And that all makes a lot of sense to me. Asamoah goes into my elimination game. So let's play this. So all this is I'm going to name a player and I'm going to tell you if I think that they're done. Or if they still have a chance to make the team. Obviously, everybody has some kind of chance. If they go play a great second preseason game that overturns all of this, and I'm very much open to that. But as it stands right now, Brian Asamoah had been outplayed by Kobe King all of camp and then had a kind of a rough preseason game. He had a cool TFL and then another nice tackle in coverage of a crossing route that came into his zone, tackled for like a 2-yard gain. Those two plays were nice. There was a misfit that led to a big run. I think he ended up in the same gap as somebody on a stunt. There were a couple of other run fit situations that he didn't do so well at. So I didn't like the game that Asamoah had, and I'm not super surprised to see them say, all right, you had your chance and we're going to cut bait. That's the end of that 2022 draft class, that, the Donatel draft class, all the old scouts. If you're mad about it all over again, I remind you, all of the scout, or most, I think they maybe kept a couple, but most of the scouts that are responsible for that class have been fired. Kwesi had only been here for a few months. It wasn't his staff. And the defensive staff that was responsible for choosing, Seen, Asamoah, Andrew Booth, all of those guys, the people with the vision for those guys are also out of the building. Elsewhere, we'll talk about the elimination game. Here's one that I think might surprise some people. Tyler Baddy. It was pretty rough. Tyler Baddy very often would pick a gap he's not allowed to go in. And I know that he's not allowed to go in it because there's another player in it. And just by the structure of a pass rush or even a run fit, it just wouldn't make sense for the other player to be in the B gap, to not have the B gap, and for Tyler Baddy to have it. Because if you think about it this way, if there's somebody in an A gap, and then two people in a B gap, the outside guy was supposed to be C, right? It's not that two people messed up and, Baddy was supposed to go A and the other guy was supposed to go somewhere else. There was one where it turned into a first down run. I think it was Graham Mertz, where Baddy just went B gap and he wasn't supposed to. There was a blitzer. Totally gives up contain because he's supposed to stop the running back from getting out to that side and running for the first down. And that's precisely what happens. There were a couple other stunts where he got beat, pass rushes that were just sort of feckless. He didn't have all terrible moments, but it was a little bit rough. There's one good special teams moment that matters, but it was too up and down for how behind the eight ball he is. And it just also sucks that Gabe Murphy had a fantastic day. And the day that Murphy had, you probably noticed, you noticed the sack, of course, and there were some other pressures that you probably saw, but there was other stuff going on in that game that was really nice. And I think I might make a Patreon video about it this week. He really came onto the scene in a way that makes me think he'll be a relevant part of the Vikings rotation, a la Patrick Jones, Jihad Ward, whoever. Let's continue with the defensive stuff. At corner, I don't know about full elimination for any of these guys or anything like that. What I will say is that Dwight McGlothern had a nice game, in my opinion. He was pretty clamps downfield and didn't get targeted a lot. And I think for the reason you want guys not to get targeted a lot, because his dude was never open. They backed off into their zones and their inverts and stuff. But there's always a play that you have to be making when that happens. And, there's an angle you have to take. There's a gap you have to close. And he was always where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. And I thought Mekhi Blackmon had a slower looking game. Now, look, the actual competition for the bottom of the roster is completely non-existent. Khalif Hailasi, who had a couple of picks, well, he has moved to safety anyways. Zamiah Vaughn is also there, but that makes 6. And then you're talking about Reddy Stewart or Ambry Thomas. And I don't know, or Keenan Garber. And I don't know if any of those guys are really presenting a serious challenge right now, even though some of those guys made interesting plays. Keenan Garber, I don't even know if he got on the field at all. If I didn't catch him, at least. But they all had a play or two that was interesting for them, but I don't think they're presenting a serious challenge for the roster right now. So Mekhi Blackmon's roster spot is fine. That's not what I'm talking about. But rather, I think that Nudie McGlothern has outplayed him for the fourth cornerback. Problem is, it's a little bit of a ships passing in the night scenario. McGlothern is probably the third outside corner. He's not going to play the slot. You have Isaiah Rodgers and you have Jeff Okudah playing on the outside. Byron Murphy is in the slot when he needs to be. If there's only 2 corners, you take Okudah out and it's just Rodgers and Murphy on the outsides versus 12 personnel or whatever. But Mekhi Blackmon as kind of that backup slot seems to just be decided. And Dwight McGlothern as the next corner, if guys start getting hurt, also seems to be decided. So I don't think they're in competition with each other, but for whatever it's worth, I think McGlothern did his job better than Mekhi Blackmon did his, where he was late to a couple things. There were completions or tackles he couldn't quite make sometimes. And in terms of especially when Byron Murphy is part of the equation, which means that a slot or an outside corner could be the decision when guys start going down. I think they would rather keep, or if it were me, I would rather, let's say, Jeff Okudah goes down. I would rather replace him with Dwight McGlothern than replace him with Mekhi Blackmon and Kick Murphy outside. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, but they're all going to make the team. We'll keep playing the elimination game here as well. Here's one that maybe surprises you. Taki Taimani, rough day. And the one time I saw him actually make a couple, I thought he had a good day, and I'm totally changing my mind about that upon watching the tape, because the two plays where I noticed him were kind of freebies. One was like a blown stunt, and just in general, the Texans O-line, I mean, the Texans offensive line has been, a bugaboo for some time for them. And so when you get down to the threes of that, the expectations aren't high. But just looking through who those guys are, they're all dudes that are like Leroy Watson, who had a terrible game, by the way, total elimination game. But they're all guys that have been cut every offseason and not even taken back on the practice squads, but somebody had a high draft grade on them, so they're going to take them into another camp and then cut them in August. It's like all guys like that or undrafted rookies. So when you talk about somebody like Elijah Williams, who dunked on those guys quite a bit, I have to temper it and say, okay, show me versus the twos. And I think I want to see him get that opportunity. And that's how it starts, but we're not crowning anybody quite yet. I also want to talk a little bit more about the offense, some special team stuff, and position battles and pictures are starting to clarify. So we'll continue next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. It's August, and that means it's time to get your fantasy leagues all set up if they aren't already. Look, everything I'm doing on fantasy right now is on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should be too. Whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, Yahoo Fantasy is good because it works. They've got all kinds of cool updates that they're rolling out this year too, but just the bare bones of the app. If you have a waiver claim at the last minute, you're not going to be waiting for the app to load or struggling to navigate through a bunch of menus. It's very clear and intuitive where you're supposed to go. They also are introducing, to celebrate 28 years of their of Yahoo Fantasy Football greatness, they are dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, which is a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. Or if you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Wrapping things out here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, I want to get into the offensive side of things more with the elimination game. I don't really have a lot more to say about the defense. I think Khalif Hailasi's game is probably going to get overrated. You get 2 interceptions, but they were both gifts, just terrible passes from the quarterback, super overthrows. You weren't really even in that good of a coverage position, so I see it as kind of getting lucky a couple times, and I want to see a little bit more. I want to see you discourage throws. I want to see you get in there, make tackles, make plays, rather than just play really deep and hope that Graham Mertz overthrows. That's not going to work in the NFL. I'll also mention Zemiah Vaughn as somebody that I think has gotten a little overrated. I don't think he had a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but it was definitely a rookie game. The reaction that you have to have on the Flores defense, especially in off-man coverage, late to one, gives up a slant, makes the tackle, but he's late to it, so it's 3 yards further downfield than you want, and you just want to tighten things up. I think that's a good place for a rookie to be, and he might make the team and then just be a stash, maybe contribute on special teams if that's what you're going to have him do. But I probably wouldn't start crowning him as a guy that could break the actual rotation on regular season games. And a couple more guys that I think we can just sort of cleanly count out. One on defense, Chaz Chambliss. I noticed him in a bad way on the live watch, and I noticed him more in a bad way. He just doesn't have the power to hang with NFL O-linemen. I mean, these are these same third teamers that get cut every year, and he's trying to speed to power and just breaking on them like water on a rock. But let's move to the offensive side of the ball. And I think the depth chart deployment of these guys is as informative as the actual production. But there are a couple guys I can just say I'm just freaking dunzo with you. One of them is Henry Bird. Henry Bird had a rough game. I mentioned it yesterday. I mistook him for Michael Juergens a couple times and blamed Michael Juergens for mistakes he made just because I got the helmet swapped up in my brain on the live watch on the broadcast sideline angle. So when I actually slowed it down and looked at the tape, I went, oh yeah, that play I wrote down Michael Juergens got killed. No, that was Henry Bird. I'm done with it. He's been in the organization for like 3 years. And I think I would much rather keep somebody else like Joe Huber on the practice squad who had a really nice day. As for tight end, I think Giovanni Ricci had a really, really rough game. I can kind of set him aside. The thing is, he's playing backup fullback right now, which might be a saving grace for him. And I think, guys like Bryson Nesbitt and Ben Urasek haven't really done quite enough to like fully put that away. So in terms of playing the elimination game, I can't quite say yes to it yet, but there's a couple guys at receiver I can, and I think I can say it with Trey Stewart. Trey Stewart barely played. They actually took him back off the field. I don't know if he got hurt or something. We haven't heard anything about that. But when it was his turn, they took him back off the field and put Xavier Scott back in sometimes. And while Xavier Scott had a couple of bad moments in pass pro that sort of put, I think, a wet blanket on the cool game that he had, I think there's still a lot more positive than negative there. And he had a really good day on special teams, which is bad news for Ty Chandler. I'm not playing the elimination game quite yet with Ty Chandler, but the receiver room, I think I am. I think we can play this with a lot. I think Silas Bolden had a bad enough game where I can sort of solidify, okay, you're not an NFL player. As a punt returner, he played like he was scared of contact and didn't want to just take the yards in front of him. So he tried to, wiggle and juke and jive and spin and flip the field and do all the stuff that he would probably get away with in college, but not in the NFL, not even in preseason NFL. Leroy Watson. Oh, no, I mentioned Leroy Watson. Vershawn Lee is another one on the O-line. Sorry to sort of bounce around here. Vershawn Lee is another one on the O-line. I saw some really nasty moments from him, and I'm pretty comfortable to sort of put him away, especially because there's another undrafted rookie in Joe Huber at his position that is cleanly running away with that position. Logan Brown also only plays with the third team and plays at right tackle. Doesn't do that great. He gives up a couple of pressures that Brosmer has to get the ball out quickly against. I think a lot of people expected more out of him that we're not seeing. But to move back to the wide receivers, Jayshon Jones needed a better day. He just needed a better day. He had a couple of catches and then a couple of plays that like were wrong because of him. If I'm reading it right, if my tape analysis is right, which isn't a guarantee, and I'm totally willing to be proven wrong there. If somebody comes out and says, no, he wasn't supposed to run that route that way. But the way I'm familiar with those routes, he didn't run them right. And you kind of can't afford to make that mistake when you have a lot of up-and-coming youngsters, and especially, the room gets that much more crowded because of Ty Felton. You got Lucky Jackson, who's in your same spot, been on the practice squad, coming in, winning wide receiver 4, and you're still running the wrong routes. I'm pretty ready to take you and kind of put you into the trash bin, but maybe not click empty on it yet. And then I don't know. So Tim Jones is another one. Not only did Tim Jones have those 2 special teams penalties, that really sucks. He did have one good play on a kickoff cover. He had a nice kind of contained tackle on that, but it certainly doesn't make up for those 2 penalties. But he also blew a block on offense, and I'm pretty ready to kind of put him away and say, you're not really going to be part of this. Plus, the special teams ace role is very high competition. There's a lot of competition for the guy that does stuff on special teams, but isn't necessarily helpful to you from scrimmage. I think Bo Richter is looking at that. Although, sorry, I'm jumping around a lot, but Bo Richter is playing the backup Dallas Turner role, I think, which I think is fascinating to think about, and I'm going to watch that a little closer in future preseason games. But I don't really know what to do with Tim Jones. I think I'm ready to kind of put him in that same bucket as and just say, like, I'm good on you as Jayshon Jones, and say I'm good at you for now, and you need to go like do something crazy awesome to sort of earn back your angle at a roster spot. Dante Fleming is another really tough one. That drop on the goal line really sucks, but he had a couple of nice catches too. I just don't think you can afford to have up and down days when you're that buried on the depth chart. And Thayer Thomas, again, misrunning that one corner route, also made a couple of errors on special teams. As a gunner, completely worthless as a gunner. Same with Silas Bolden, just totally destroyed by the Jammers as a gunner. And so you get taken out of that battle, and then suddenly you're looking at a brick wall. You just don't have a way in. So that wide receiver room has really clarified to me. A couple of guys I haven't mentioned. Miles Price had a nice game. I think he's very much still in all of this. And Robert Lewis, who's been hurt and didn't play, but I should just mention his name so you know I didn't forget about him. And of course, didn't mention the quarterbacks because that QB3 battle has gotten harder, if anything. The thing about QB3 is that it is really likely to be a 53-man roster spot, not a practice squad slot. Because to get that additional game day activation, you got to have him on your 53-man roster. So if you want emergency QB Max Brosmer, he's got to be on your 53-man roster, and then you can elevate 2 other guys from your practice squad. So it behooves the team a lot to have a third QB on the active 53 with these rules, and there's a reason that most teams kept a clean 3 and not 2 and maybe 4 if you're trying to stash somebody, like if you're in a weird Brown situation. If I didn't mention your favorite player, that probably means that things are still plenty wide open for them or just haven't changed much at all for them. But tomorrow is joint practices. Or today, actually, as you're listening to it Wednesday morning. Wednesday, joint practices with the Patriots. Will be recapping that tomorrow. And then I want to kind of redo my 53-man roster after the first preseason game and update that, which I haven't actually updated on this show since OTAs. So we will take a good long look at the roster there, and then we're right back into breaking down a preseason game. Check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.